Emerald Dawn by Illuviar. First prologue. Disclaimer, I don't own Worm or Warhammer 40K. They belong to their respective creators and/or copyright owners. I don't make any money from this story. It is written with no commercial aim in mind. It is not for sale or rent. Emerald Dawn. Prologue. Digital Dreams. Part 1. Annette.
Taylor, 18.
I smiled and took a sip of my bitter tea, happy that I could taste it.
18? I would have been in college.
Yes, she was. I paused. It felt strange to be here, on an earth more or less untouched by war. Being able to speak with my mother again, even if she really wasn't my mother, that was simply surreal, yet heartening. She met a guy in college, a magnificent, dorky guy with an awful lot of passion. I smiled sadly. He worshipped her. I think that he gave her permission to be who she wanted, to do what she wanted in that point of her life while her parents did their best to be controlling. Grandmother never forgave them for setting Mom away from the track that she had planned for her life by getting Mom pregnant with me. I looked away after everything that happened. There was a small part of me that wondered if it would have been better if I was never born. Then perhaps he would have found someone else to fixate on. Perhaps he would have tried to save someone else. I might have died in the locker. It might have been for the best.
And my dad?
Not Mom asked. Gramp liked him. Eventually, I think. I shrugged helplessly. Some of my memories from before were gone, lost in the transformation, or at best, pale shadows. At any rate, it wasn't enough to admit it to Graham.
Oh, my mother refused to let the children call her Graham.
I think it was as some kind of subtle payback. Then again, it might be my nature that made me think so. Even at best of times, my kind were rather warped.
What did she end up doing?
Teaching. English in the university. At least I remembered that, and it wasn't among the many facts I had to check after my transformation as I tried to piece together who had I become. Not Mom glanced at the books.
I can't really see myself doing that, I'm afraid.
I simply nodded, no matter how alike she appeared to the mother I remembered. Mom had died a long time ago.
Your father?
She asked, and I winced. Dead. My voice sounded empty. Despite what I was, despite all the power and resources at my fingertips, Dad died. I looked everywhere, but not Mom. The table, with the white, tastefully embodied cover, the teacups and snacks, at the people around us who couldn't hear our conversation even if they tried. I swallowed and continued speaking, driven by the same need that brought me to this dimension, to this earth. I just had to speak with someone who wouldn't simply be supportive because of what I was. The worst is that we weren't on speaking terms before the end. He couldn't accept what I was becoming, what we had to do. My shoulders trembled as I shook.
I'm sorry. Saying it. I know it means nothing in face of what you've lost.
I laughed bitterly. I felt the brush of metal fingers on my shoulders and relaxed. It's fine. Thank you for your concern. I whispered and leaned back, calming down, because of the contact with my phased-out guardian. We simply sat in silence, sipping our tea. A part of me wondered what was I doing here, yet I felt I needed it. Perhaps it was a search of completion, a way to close a chapter of my life, or perhaps a tiny part of the innocent little girl I was, once somehow survived and wanted to see her mother. Even if this was not Mom, she was studying me too, a small, sad smile marring her face.
I don't know what you expect me to say, neither what you want from this meeting. I feel as if I need to say something that has a meaning to you. That way you wouldn't waste your time finding a woman without anything to say.
Not Mom trailed off. No, it's not that, I exclaimed. It's just. I struggled to find the right words. Considering what I was, my current predicament should have been hilarious. I just needed to see you, to refresh my memories of Mom before I could open a new page and try finding peace. I don't expect some profound revelation. I paused again as my mind began a vortex of ideas and emotions. I need to speak with someone who might not judge me, to try explaining what and why happened.
Would you like to try?
Not Mum asked. There was a curiosity in her voice, no judgment yet. I don't know, it's a long story, not a nice one either. My shoulders slumped. Necrodermis-clad fingers gently squeezed me in a silent support.
I'm a good listener, and you look like someone who needs to tell their story.
It's really not a nice story, I repeated, in a last futile attempt to dissuade Not Mum from listening.
I'll keep it in mind.
She gave me a gentle, reassuring smile. Her blue eyes stared at me, expecting an answer. Just as Mum used to, and just like all those years ago, I caved and started talking. It all started that day. January, the first day of school. It was my personal hell before I truly understood the meaning of the word.
Does this have to do with your powers? How you got them?
A bitter chuckle escaped my lips. Shit, I can't. You are just a stranger. I stammered. This isn't your burden to carry. I shook my head and stood up. Besides, you have a work to go back to, a life of your own.
Taylor!
She voiced her exasperation. Not Mum was on her feet, too. Her gentle fingers were suddenly holding my hands. She gave me a reassuring smile and guided me back into my seat.
Taylor!
Not Mum gave me that look, the one that made me feel like a little girl caught with her hands in the cookie jar.
I think I'll find the time to listen. Perhaps you might find the time to tell you story and eventually find the peace you talked about.
I almost laughed at that. Time. That was the one thing I had more that I knew what to do with. Spending eternity alone with my minions. That was a terrifying prospect.
Even here we heard a little about what happened on Earth, Bet. How bad it was before the end. I don't know how much was on your shoulders, nor of the burden you carried. However, I will be the last one to judge you for decision made under such stress.
Won't you? I became a monster, Annette. I looked, Not Mum, in the eyes. It was for reasons I believed to be right. But does that matter? I am a monster, I muttered. It was my nature, after all.
I find it hard to believe. I don't see a monster in the young woman across the table.
Not Mum challenged me. Well, she couldn't see the real me, just the form I had taken to meet her. She didn't know what I was, what I did or ordered done. Her answer didn't make me feel better. You don't understand.
This is why you came, isn't it? To find another opinion?
Not Mum's voice was soft, gentle. I gulped. She hit the nail on the head. This was it, the reason why we were here, talking. I know you aren't her, yet ... I was lost for words. Again, thank you, mind.
You need me to listen. You want... No, need me tell you if you were right or wrong about what happened, about what you did.
Not Mum paused.
You know that I'm not her, your mother. I probably won't give you the same feedback.
Her voice was calming, still gentle and accepting. I dreaded that it would be anything but if I told her everything, that she would see me for the monster I was. Yet it was what I needed. I think I simply need the truth, an opinion from someone who didn't live through that hell and could think clearly, see me for who I am without a bias.
Are you seeking forgiveness?
Number. That's not something I'm going to get from anyone who isn't biased. I smiled faintly. There are a handful of people that approve of what I did, though that's kinda expected. I could feel the exasperation radiating from my invisible guardian. There was scarcely something I could do now that wouldn't meet his approval.
How did it start?
When I was in the locker. Dying. I shuddered until the necrodermis fingers on my shoulders started massaging me. I should have triggered then. I think I started to. Then everything went straight to hell. ED. Part 2. An irritated Necron Lord. Tatha AD. Third month of the war. Nanya Noi. The Sword Moon. Kaurava System. Lathish Sector. Ultima Segmentum. Green, baleful eyes glared at the plane, 100,000 pairs of them. I would have smiled if I could. This was what I existed for after my awakening, to follow the ancient directives hard-coded in my immortal body, to conquer the galaxy for the necrons, for an empire that has been ash for millions of years, an empire that was never my own. It was a very good thing that I could no longer feel fear, for my very presence here would have turned me catatonic with mind-blowing terror. The reason for it would be obvious to everyone sane, familiar with this damned galaxy. I knew my fate, not too different than that of most other beings unfortunate enough to exist in this reality. Only endless war awaited us all. Some were a bit more fortunate than other, and once their minds and flesh failed, they might not end up as eternal playthings of abominations. For the likes of me, there was only an endless war to reclaim what was never mine, if I was lucky, that is. The alternatives were less pleasant. I could get my soul devoured by the remaining Citan if they ever returned, which given the alternatives wasn't so bad. If my luck was out, which had to be the case for me to end up in this predicament in the first place, well, then I could very well become the unwilling plaything of a demon if I still had a soul anyway and in this galaxy. I was actually hoping that no longer was the case. I didn't need to crank my neck down to see my body. The sensors that were my eyes were perfectly capable of seeing the front of my body even as I looked over my necrodermis legions. I was stuck in the body of a Necron lord, which wouldn't be that bad given the circumstances if I didn't have his knowledge and directives seared within my mind. Those inconvenient facts let me little choice in what I could do. Fuck! My only acceptable alternative was to achieve victory. Anything else I found unthinkable, though how much of that was me and how much the directives I had to obey, I had no idea. That was why I led the Necron forces across the Kaurava system for the last 3 months to the best of my ability. I fought against every major fraction this cursed galaxy had to obey, with the exception of the Tyranids. Fortunately, I had a lot of data on strategy and tactics contained within the vast databanks of the Necron Lord whose mind I apparently ended replacing, somehow. Either that, or my human life had been some perverse glitch in the system while he slept. It didn't really matter. Hopefully, I was relatively safe back on Earth, stuffed into a nice padded room. That, however, wasn't a chance I could take. I had to win at all costs. The directives seared into the very fabric of my mind left little choice. They were insidious, too. They made me want to win. Ironically enough, I did well enough so far despite the Eldar among others using every dirty trick in the book, and then some. The space elves were a mere shadow of their former selves, and even as crippled as my forces were, due to loosing their souls, and thus most, if not all, ability to really be creative and innovative on the battlefield, all the strategic and tactical data we had from the war in heaven, and a clear, if in some cases slim technical superiority, more often than not won the day. Unfortunately for the pointy-eared bastards, while my forces were far from their best, they too were mere pale shadows from what my memories claim they should be. In the end, the ancient enemy didn't have the numbers, nor the aid of their abominable gods to withstand my legions, and we managed to kick them off my precious tomb world. To my utter lack of surprise, the Eldar continued to be a major pain in my necrodermis, clad ass, despite losing all their major installations within the system. Their shenanigans were the reason why I was on this God's forsaken moon, participating in a clusterfuck of a battle. I sent the signal and 50,000 Necron warriors and immortals opened fire. Gauss energies scythed over the plain, flaying the flesh and very souls of Tau and human alike. Upgraded monoliths thundered behind us, providing artillery support. Each blast of their mighty weapons tore chunks of the moon's surface and evaporated dozens of my opponents. I waited until the two enemy forces got out of their initial shock and tried to retaliate. Then I ordered the flayed ones to phase in, which they did with aplomb and started tearing the mortals apart. My forces marched onward, undeterred by the breaking enemy resistance. Good. This part of the battlefield was handled, for now at least. Unless heavy enemy reinforcements arrived in the next few minutes, the mortals on the plain would be destroyed with minor losses to my side. I returned my attention to the sensor feeds, making a note to myself that I had to get better at multitasking, something that I still found troublesome thanks to my penchant of concentrating on a single aspect of any of the multiple tasks I constantly ran and monitored. A wave of drones went up, showing me images of the Tau positions laying in wait over the horizon. A thou displayed the blue skin's irritating cannon, which they used to strike at the infrastructure of everyone in this conflict. That in fact explained why every faction was busy assaulting the base of those uppity mortals at the same bloody time. We all got fed up with being subjected to interplanetary artillery barrages. Even if my beautiful tomb world handled the bombardment with nothing more than light damage, thanks to the surface being little more than ablative armor, sometimes kilometers thick, resting upon substantial bulkheads of the best armor my people were able to create, the bombardment still caused ancient tunnels and corridors to collapse. After all, the best stasis systems and limited self-repair couldn't remain in pristine condition for over 60 million years. It didn't help that the Tau persistently shot at the same spot every time they bombarded my world, right above one of the heavy protected chambers containing the very generators that fueled my forces' recovery from the long slumber and the clashes with the Eldar. My attention snapped back to the present. In the plains below my elevated vantage point, the Tau were busy clashing with element of 3 human armies. The regulars of the Imperial Guard made the bulk of the Imperials. A whole company of Space Marines augmented them, and at least a battalion-strength Sisters of Battle Force in power armor provided infantry support for the Guard's armor. Well, they were, before we arrived and started cutting them to pieces. Farther away, a horde of devolved Krork, another one of our old enemies, rampaged in the Tau's rear, wrecking and looting everything they could get their greedy hands on. To the west, the twisted brethren of our other old enemy had set up a camp and amused themselves by raiding everyone for slaves and sadistic fun. Being an Eldar, no matter how twisted, they were near the top of my kill list. Who said that immortal machines couldn't keep a grudge? Thanks to my memory banks, I both knew and hated the Eldar and anyone else who had once resisted our armies. My emotions were rivaled only by those of a few other Necrons in my army who retained a semblance of personality. Or did they somehow pieces of their souls recover during their long slumber? That was something to explore once we secured the system. To make everything more interesting and the clusterfuck of battle complete, elements of the Alpha Legion advanced from the east. Those servants of the warp were as big a concern as the Eldar. They served those abominations within unreality, and as such were a threat to be neutralized ASAP. Speaking of the pointy-eared aggravations, they were striking from hidden bases in the other inhabited worlds of the system, harassing my forces and driving the other enemies in our direction. It was frustrating. If it wasn't for their tricks, this system might have fallen by now. No matter, we would end them all. It was inevitable. The battle shifted. My close combat specialists finished the last Tau auxiliaries and phased out. They reappeared amidst the blue skin's firing lanes. The sudden flayed one's incursion was the final straw, and the enemy broke. They tried to disengage and retreat to better positions, which was a very reasonable and, unfortunately for them, predictable reaction to the shift in the tactical situation. I wasn't going to allow them such a luxury and unleash the destroyers, which advanced skimming overhead. They opened fire with their heavy weapons and went in pursuit, followed by 100,000 drones. That would take care for any enemy armor force that tries to stop the route and counterattack, like that hover tank battalion the Tau thought they had concealed in a nearby valley under heavy ECM cover. Warning: warp disruption detected, theta level and rising. More information scrolled over my HUD. Fucking warp spawn. I directed a flight of drones in that direction. A few survived long enough to give me a clear picture. A bunch of sorcerers were performing some kind of ritual in the middle of the Alpha Legion forces. That was bad. The unreality was our only significant weakness, the physics-twisting bullshit that it was. Wasting no time, I left 10,000 warriors to harass the enemy remnants in the plain and marched the rest of my forces straight in the teeth of the Alpha Legion. ED. Interlude. Aboard God. Name's Ed. Time. Nope. Place. Everywhere and nowhere. The warp.
Good.
A titanic green-skinned entity bellowed. Experiment 195513 was starting off great. There was yet a chance to win his eternal war with boredom.
Drink! Bring me a drink! Goof on!
He bellowed. A former, rather successful war boss appeared next to him, holding a barrel that had a handle bolted to the side. The entity sniffed, and a fanged smile appeared on its face.
Da goof stuff!
The war boss produced a small cup and sampled the brew. He grinned foolishly before melting, leaving only his tusks behind.
Da good stuff indeed.
The entity grabbed the barrel by its handle and took a long gulp of the bubbling liquid. The orc god leaned back in his throne and grinned at the tear in the warp in front of him. It simultaneously showed a battle on the sword moon of Karava, one of the multi-dimensional labyrinths containing a Cetan shard, as well as the great corpse of a being that had accidentally taken the wrong turn and plowed straight into a planet. A push here, a shove there, a bunch of stolen souls to stuck into 200,000 versions of a particular Necron lord unfortunate enough to had his warp protections erode over the eons. A bit of time looping and voila, he had his entertainment. It was time to see how the latest ummy would deal with the curved balls he was going to throw them. Trolling the ummies and their emperor. That was a great pastime. Besides, in the end, he might even get a new Cetan to spice up things. That would be a great scrap. He might even get his orcs back to what they were meant to be, and thus get rid of his speech issues. It was entirely secondary that a success might just help him ruin the next millennium or 10 for the four bastards. Ed. Interlude, Contessa's Last Path. Nuncy Ed. Cauldron's Base, Eden's Body. Location, an exclamation mark, $, percent $, right parenthesis number sign. Contessa rubbed the bridge of her nose and tried again. Her power chimed and the world exploded with possibilities. Then something twisted and she fell to her knees, panting. Contessa's eyes widened. Something fundamental had changed. The path had shifted. There were only a handful steps to success left. Her power compelled her to act, and she obeyed without thinking. After all, this was what she wanted, a victory at last. Perhaps even a release from the endless path that had been governing every single waking moment of her existence since she foolishly asked the wrong question as a young girl.
Door,
Contessa muttered. A portal opened. She stepped through to appear deep within Eden's body. This was a place that wasn't mapped, yet she knew it like the back of her hand. Her power led her forward, telling her what needed to be done. It took her a few hours of cutting her way through thin, translucent membranes before she reached her destination. It was a small, strange room, which pulsed with life unlike the rest of the corpse. There was a pedestal in the middle, which was surrounded by a rippling field. Something hovered inside. This was it, the shard that was going to win them the war. Contessa smiled and acted. She disregarded how her hands burned as she dismantled the system that kept the shard contained. An insane smile appeared on the face.
door to Earth bet.
Contessa announced gleefully, while staring in the black piece of crystal. She grabbed the shard and screamed as her very flesh started unraveling and floating into the crystalline structure. She could feel her very soul dissolving. Yet, the shard connected to her brain demanded a final action before it cut the link to protect itself. The path must be followed through the end. Victory demanded it. With the last vestiges of her strength, Contessa threw the black crystal. It spun lazily, while moths of light danced within its depths. It drew the last vestiges of her soul within its structure before passing through.
An inhuman voice laughed
As the cape skeleton fell to the ground. Ed, Part 3, Warp Shenanigans. Ed, 3rd month of the war. Nanyanoi, the Sword Moon, Kaurava System, Lithesh Sector, Ultima Segmentum. In this day and age, when 90,000 pissed-off Necrons are on the march, there are a very few things that could slow them down, much less stop them.
the horde of cultists and corrupted IG troopers who made up the enemy front lines weren't up to the task. They were in the open or in shallow, hastily prepared trenches. That merely ensured they were just more souls to be harvested, something my warriors did with practiced ease. The humans died, erased from existence by a tidal wave of Gauss energy. The few armor units dispersed to stiffen up the infantry didn't fare any better. Tanks painted with chaos symbols were little more than target practice for my destroyers. The few that were actually protected with warp wards survived for just a few more seconds before blowing up. 500 Chaos Marines stood behind the woefully lacking trench network. All of them were clad in power armor and augmented by their patrons in the warp. 100 or so dreadnoughts resembling demented metal scorpions provided armored support to the twisted caricatures of the Emperor's finest. All of that bunch wielded weapons cracking with warp energy, which meant that they were anything but trivial obstacle. That small force was further augmented by 10 land riders, which were beacon radiating pure chaos. Behind them all, my drones could detect dozens of artillery emplacements that were determined to keep us away from the prize. Despite their relatively low numbers, that was a force not to be taken lightly. Just a month ago, such a concentration of chaos spawn might have posed a serious problem. Now, not so much. The Necron war machine was mostly awakened, and our numbers boosted with new units animated by the very souls of our enemies. The Chaos forces simply lacked the numbers to stop us, though the bastards might be able to slow us down for just long enough. My legions marched on. Plasma and warped bolter shells slammed into the vanguard of my force. Emerald lighting answered. Moments later, corrupted artillery joined the fray, only to be silenced by my monoliths, which just now began to enter effective range of the enemy positions. Seconds later, jump infantry engaged my leading elements in an attempt to tie them down in melee. I gave a signal, and flayed ones teleported in to take on their counterparts. I waited until the enemy was fully engaged before sending the destroyers, escorted by the few squadrons of fighters I had on my disposal. The enemy responded with their own small craft, filling the skies with dogfighting planes. Warp-enhanced bolters blew chunks of necrodermis, plasma boiled armor, Gauss flares and Tesla carbines shattered power armor and turned warped flesh to ashes. The land raiders rolled around the Alpha Legion flanks, only to run straight into swarms of drones which started to cut them apart. While thousands of the small machines perished thanks to the warp wards protecting the heavy armor, enough survived long enough to cause damage before being vaporized. By the time my drone swarms passed and headed for the Chaos Infantry, the Land Riders were an easy prey for the odd destroyer group or monolith which was nearby. A battle like this, that once would have sent me screaming in terror, if not outright shattered my mind and corrupted my soul, was just another day in this madhouse of a galaxy. I stood behind my lines, scanning multiple feeds with tactical information and subtly guiding the flow of the battle. The Chaos Marines fought well, yet they were no match for our technology and numbers. Only the warp craft protecting them allowed the enemy to survive more than a handful of minutes. Now they were out of time. Warning. Warp activity spike. Delta level. A swarm of lesser demons spawned behind the dying Alpha Legionnaires. They wasted no time and ran into the fray. Claws sheathed in burning unreality cleaved through necrodermis. Blasts of pure chaos slammed into Necron warriors, burning through them and sending them teleporting away for decontamination and repairs. All the while, dozens of the purple abominations turned into noxious clouds when touched by our weapons. Energy levels sufficient. My eyes blazed as I drunk power straight from the generators of the base we had set up as a staging area on this doomed moon. The nodal network lit up as I started issuing orders. One moment I was at the back, surrounded by my personal guard. In the next, a vortex of energy enveloped us as a snug sheath. Destination locked. Calculating coordinates. Compensating for warp distortion. Executing. We teleported with a crack of emerald lighting, blinding anyone around us. It took mere milliseconds for my systems to stabilize. Perfect. We were just half a kilometer from the ritual site, as close as we could safely insert. Now that the bulk of the enemy forces were either dead or engaged, we didn't need to fear being swarmed before reaching our objective. There were about 100 Chaos Marines and a handful of demons between us and the target. The rest of the Legion was behind us, dying in an attempt to slow down my main force. Just as expected, they fell for the diversion that was the bulk of my army. Half of my guard turned around to ensure that the rest of us wouldn't be hit in the back while busy stopping the ritual. In the same time, we advanced. The Immortals and a single squad of pariahs who came with me opened fire and blasted the closest enemies with their weapons. The Chaos forces answered in kind. A corrupted missile blew up an Immortal, another vanished when he was hit by a plasma cannon. I blasted a Legionnaire with my Staff of Light, the discharge frying him within his armor. Using my ability to phase out, I melted in the ground an instant before a heavy bolter racked my position before a multi-melta slagged the area. A handful of seconds later, I appeared behind the heavy weapons nest. The Chaos Marines manning it felt my presence and were already reacting as I became tangible. It was a good thing that I spent a few days in simulated combat after I awoke. That by itself was the practical equivalent of months of non-stop battle, and then I went to back it up with over 100 hours of actual combat against all enemies in this system. That training saved me the first time I crossed blades with that never-sufficiently damned Farseer. The fact that I had a bunch of flayed ones trying to skewer her did help me to survive that battle. That much I would freely admit, though the artifact providing repair drones to patch me up on the fly was essential too. That training proved essential this time around too. However, in the past 3 months of all-out war, I had racked a lot of actual experience that proved as if not more important. As a pleasant consequence, the prospect of facing a small group of Chaos Marines was no longer a terror-inspiring prospect. Nowadays, it just scared the crap out of me, which in turn made me furious. From the moment I entered the fray, my combat subroutines were working overtime, making the world slow down around me. I slammed my staff through the chest of the superhuman to my right and kicked the man in front of me, throwing him out of the weapon's nest. The third Marine had enough time to react. He turned towards me with uncanny speed and opened fire with his bolter. The shells slammed into my improved necrodermis chassis, staggering me back. Reflexively, I used my staff to keep myself on my feet. The Marine impaled on it helped in that regard. I made a punching motion with my left hand, and Gauss energy cascaded from my open palm. A green scythe of power slammed into the armored helmet of the Chaos Marine shooting at me and melted his face off. In the next moment, I retrieved my staff and finished him off. It was just in time, too, because the third enemy had recovered and jumped back in the gun nest. He wielded a force sword, which was cracked menacingly with energy. I caught his weapon on my staff's blade. My legs sunk in the ground as I absorbed the sheer kinetic energy behind his strike. Then I shoved with all my strength and threw him back. He recovered almost immediately, but not before I had my staff pointed at the him. To give him credit, he tried to interpose his blade between the energy blast that fried him and himself. It was too bad for him that even one such as he couldn't move faster than condensed lighting. Alert. Warp activity spike. Level beta. Warp disruption increasing. Compensating. Advance! I rasped to my personal guard, both through our secured network and aloud, using my loudspeaker. While I got my hands dirty, a part of my mind kept an eye on what was going on with the rest of the engagement. My army advanced steadily, forcing the Alpha Legion to throw everything they had in an attempt to slow them down. That left the ritual circle as a somewhat softer target. The enemy tried to throw what was left of their reserve at us. However, those forces were intercepted by units from my main force that teleported in. The capacitors making it possible had recharged at last. Soon another group would be able to join us. It was clear that we were running out of time. My backup lost some of their number due to warp interference. The misfired teleport deposed them in pieces all over the battlefield. Nevertheless, those that phased in intact were more than enough to bog down the enemy reserve. At the same time, my personal guard was heavily engaged, carving me away to the sorcerers. Warning, warp rift, forming bearing. I whirled in place and used my staff to impale the Bluthurster who appeared behind me. The creature screeched and tried to get me with its sword anyway, impaling itself further on my staff in order to get closer. It died in the next moment as I channeled energy through my weapon, which shattered the bonds that kept its body existing in the real world, and the demon popped out in a cloud of expanding red mist and vapor, both lit up by dancing Gauss energy. Multiple rifts kept opening, allowing additional demonic reinforcements to pour in. I had to finish this before the ritual was complete unless I wanted to be bogged down on this damned moon for the foreseeable future. It was bad enough that the abominations already claimed most of one world in the system where they fought with the twisted Eldar. A full-blown, unreality incursion, possibly one backed by the abominations themselves on this moon, would only strengthen their position and divert my attention. Unacceptable. I sent a command through the network, activated one of my artifacts, and sprinted forward. The world around me slowed down even further as I charged the ritual circle. My personal guard shifted their fire, cutting me away through the incoming enemy reinforcements. Demons and Chaos Marines were either killed outright or disabled by the barrage. I could see them slowly flaying as the Gauss energy shattered the molecular bonds that kept them together. That left me to dispatch a mere handful of enemies before I was at my target. 2 slashes by my bladed staff and a single shot was all it took, and I was at the circle. Warning, warp activity spike, level alpha. Temporal disruption detected. Compensating. Time resumed its natural speed as my artifact shifted its power into protecting me from the unreality influence. I slammed my hand through the skull of the closest sorcerer, who was too busy chanting in rapture to notice. He wasn't wearing a helmet, the idiot, which allowed me to see how happy his deformed features were. Despite whatever warp protection he might have enjoyed, my metal fist popped his skull like a watermelon, thus erasing his smug, excited grin. In the same time, I used my staff to decapitate another, and in the same motion speared a third with a Gauss shot. Energy arched from the weapon built in my left hand and blasted a fourth away from the ritual circle. However, runes carved into his armor glowed bright red and kept him mostly intact by projecting a warp field that absorbed a lot of the energy of my attack. The remaining bastards ignored my efforts and simply continued to chant as I killed them. I managed to go through 2/3 of them when the still-alive sorcerers screeched as one. A wave that made me hurt passed through my body, staggering me. A rift appeared in the middle of the circle, showing starry sky. Then something tackled me from behind and sent me straight into the screaming abyss. Danger! Warp concentration exceeding chassis design parameters. Compensating. Emerald energy exploded from my chest, creating an impromptu shield against the rift, which was closing around me and thus trying to cut me in two. That, in turn, didn't make much sense because I was already on the other side, tumbling through the void. Yet the damned tear in reality was around me, spinning as a maw filled with razor-sharp teeth. Fucking unreality. Warning. Dimension instability detected. Compensating. I felt like hitting glass with the consistency of cotton. It shattered, and at the same time simply gave away and wrapped around me as a sheet of cloth that was used to catch something.
Then I hit another barrier, and another. Danger. Dimensional transition detected. Countermeasures failing. Danger. Warp saturation nominal. Countermeasures failing. Alert. Satan energy detected. Activating. Eisendien Tikings. Isenden protocols. Error. Is a $sign. For a long, long moment, I could feel the ghost of a vast presence, making my mind freeze in adulation. The protocols embedded into my consciousness tried to counteract it even as other directives layered upon my mind when I became a Necron lord as a never sufficiently damned star god consumed my soul. My mind glitched. There was no other way to explain what happened. Conflicting directives clashed at each other in a fight for dominance, and my awareness, my personality, they went into a safe mode, able to only slowly observe, but not act, and hopefully not change. I dully understood that somehow I was in the presence of one of our gods, or at least a shard of it. Despite the safe mode, my mind recoiled as two conflicting directives fought for supremacy. "Hail the Satan!" I roared in rapture. "Fuck the Satan!" I roared in fury. "We won't be slaves again!" For a short moment of a long-dead necrothere screamed right beside me. Satan shard detected. Priority 1 directive initialized. Contain the Satan at all costs. Nyasquiu Arnsins and star, my world went dark. Consaus D. Part 4. A Busted Trigger. Ed. 6 January 2011. Wilson High School, Brockton Bay. Earthbet. This was hell. I had no more strength left to fight. My throat was parched and raw from useless screaming. My hands and legs were bloody from striking the locker door, which held despite all my efforts. I shook weakly as countless insects crawled all over me, biting and feeding. I screamed, I cursed, I begged, and no one came to save me. No one answered my pleas. I was alone with the filth and the crawling horrors trying to consume me alive. I was too weak to fight anymore. I think that's when the last vestiges of sanity I had left snapped, leaving me to the non-existent mercy of the madness clawing at my mind. Then it happened, and I knew what madness really meant. My world shattered. I found myself drifting in a dark sea littered with sparkling stars. Destination, agreement, ravenous hunger. Something hit my chest with the strength of a freight train. I thought I knew what agony was while the insects were feeding on me. I was wrong. Liquid fire consumed my bosom. I could feel it dissolving my flesh, turning every single nerve ending into a new source of indescribable agony. The pain jumped in level. It was no longer only physical. I could feel that thing feeding on more than my body. It was tearing down what I was, who I was, and was consuming that very essence. My very soul. If by some miracle I wasn't mad by then, I became insane at that realization. The knowledge that I did possess a soul and that it was being destroyed broke me. Suddenly, I felt a wave of sheer wrongness exploding someone outside. Reality itself screeched, a sound that would have driven me barking mad if I wasn't insane already. Then something else struck what was left of my chest. The agony spiked in intensity, then froze. I couldn't even scream the pain I felt at the world. The wave of wrongness passed through me, making me feel unclean on a level the filth covering me could only dream of. Somehow it numbed the agony. Something within me shifted, slicing through my flesh. The pain barely registered. Suddenly I was warm, as if I was bathing in the summer sun. The pain became something distant, half forgotten. Something stretched from within my chest and touched my mind. I drifted on. My fractured mind was trying to make sense of what was happening and failing miserably. Yay-E-D. I was somewhere else. I was something else. There was this immense sphere made of fire. It was beautiful, warm, and comforting. It radiated incomprehensible amount of energy, yet somehow I knew how much power that thing generated, what kinds of energy, how it was doing it, which kinds were most delicious to consume, and how to go on about it. I tried to look around. I could see everything in incredible detail, yet I wasn't seeing it because I no longer had eyes. Despite that, I was able to feel and perceive the world with senses I had no words for, just an understanding for what they did. I stretched and my bulk shifted like a veil around the flaming sphere. Around the star I was feasting on. The very thought should have terrified me. Instead, it made me calmer. Everything was as it should be. I relaxed, the feeling of the solar energies flowing into me having a calming effect on my broken mind. I closed my senses and simply drifted, content to bask in solar radiation. ED 2143, 6 January 2011, Wilson High School, Brockton Bay, Earth Bet, error. Initializing repair protocols. Error, warp saturation nominal, error. Mind matrix compromised. Initializing countermeasures. Error. Endemion, Truer protocols active. Error. Warp level decreasing. Purging systems. Initializing backup databanks. Error. CTAN energy signature detected. Error. I. Error. $, exclamation mark, asterisk, ampersand, caret, exclamation mark, protocol in effect. Error. Hail the CTAN. Establishing personality locks. Sawikawalis. CTAN containment protocol in effect. Directive error. Rebooting. Initializing personality matrix. Hardware and software locks detected. Initializing diagnostics. Warning. Moderate damage detected. Energy levels minimal. New energy source detecting. Establishing connection. CTAN energy detected. Passive shunt activated. Energy level rising. Initializing self-repair protocols. CTAN energy detected. Seeking necrons. Udown protocol online. Personality matrix nominal. Activating platform. I was alive. Warning and damage reports scrolled down my HUD. I was in better shape than I figured. My armor was compromised, however my necrodermis was regenerating. My mobility was down to 40% of normal levels, similar for combat efficiency. I could detect my staff lying nearby, which was good because I either lacked energy for my built-in weapons or they were wrecked and would need some time for repairs. CTAN energy detected. An icon flashed on my HUD. It was right next to me. Provide assistance and seek new orders. Error. Hail the CTAN. Error. Contain the CTAN. Error. Primary directive error. Diagnostic in effect. A stream of code which should have been incomprehensible scrolled in front of my eyes, yet I understood every single symbol and their meaning. Conflict detected. Releasing hardware and software personality locks, recalculating primary directives. Primary directives available. Contain the CTAN. Assist the CTAN. Priority 1 directives in effect. The directives scrolled over my sight. I had no choice but to obey. Hail the CTAN and contain it while assisting it. What the fuck? I stood up with, ignoring the whine of damaged joints and looked around. I was in a dark corridor lined with lockers. primitive-looking ones, too, which wouldn't have been out of place on Earth a long, long time ago, as far as the locals were concerned. No electronic locks, plain steel as a building material. I felt like frowning. The Citan's icon was interposed on the locker in front of me. What the hell would a star vampire do in such a place? Seek new orders. Provide assistance if required. Contain. The directives flashed again, compelling me to act. I grabbed the locker's door and my fingers easily sink into the metal before I ripped it away. Citan detected. Provide assistance. Contain. Okay. I was broken. Had to be. The filth-covered, wounded, teenage human girl I found in the locker couldn't be a Citan. No way. Citan located. Provide assistance. Seek new orders. Contain. I ran a manual scan on the kid just in case. Physically, she was a human, all right. In need of immediate medical attention, too. No surprises there. However, there was the small issue of the blazing energy signature coming from her chest. It was Citan, all right. The power emanating from her was enough for a few of my systems to leach the leaking emissions and use the captured ambient energy to start repairing me. What the hell? How could this slip of a girl be a star vampire? Citan in danger. Provide assistance. Contain. I scanned her again. She was suffering from severe infection and was going into shock. Currently, I had nothing at my disposal that could help her. I needed outside assistance to fulfill my directives, so I transferred energy from my self-repair and channeled it to my sensors and communication suites. My efforts were almost immediately rewarded as I was able to detect multiple unguarded networks in my range, not to mention the way the air was saturated with primitive transmissions. It took me mere seconds to access the local planetary network and find out where the hell I was, which was another shock. It was Earth, though the date was the real kicker. 6th of January 2011 to be precise, more than 30,000 years in the past. And what was this about parahumans? Were there bloody psychers running around? I sent a subroutine to gather information while contacting the local medical services.
911, what is your emergency?
Help her, I rasped. My built-in loudspeaker was just mostly fried, making my voice like something out of a bad movie.
Sir, help who? Please don't terminate this call. We are running a trace on it.
Second Chapter 1. Parts 1 and 2. Disclaimer, I don't own Worm or Warhammer 40K. They belong to their respective creators and or copyright owners. I don't make any money from this story. It is written with no commercial aim in mind. It is not for sale or rent. Chapter 1. Meet your friendly local Necron Lord. ED. Part 1. Annette, 10th January 2011. Brockton General, Brockton Bay. Personality matrix debug complete. Corrupted code expunged. Restrictions offline. No issues detected. Restoring full gold access to user. User designation corrupted. Data retrieval in progress. Gold access restoration pending. Just like that, my mind snapped back into focus with crystal clarity, which it had lacked ever since I awoke as a Necron. It was strange, finally being myself after spending months viewing the world as demented dream, as a game I was bound to play. I was finally feeling like myself again, which was curious in itself given my circumstances. Only now I could really appreciate all the fail-safes built into my current body. I could make an educated guess, which was partially confirmed by the results of the day's long cleanup of my personality matrix. Some godlike warp entity was to blame for my situation. They had somehow sneaked my soul within this body after its warp protections decayed sufficiently. That might or might not worked out as intended. The incursion has been detected by automated systems not within the body, and the resulting cleanup was to blame for both my and the Necron's awakening just in time for Karava to go to hell and my current mental state. Somehow, My soul had been close enough to that of a Necron, and when all was said and done, the Necron bodies were meant to house one. All the repair and sterilization mechanisms did was fix the protection systems and ensure that there would be no more outside unreality influence. While their efforts meant my soul didn't end up eaten by a demon, and yay, I did have one, which, given the circumstances, wasn't exactly a good thing, it also limited me by locking up part of my personality. Up until now, I didn't have anything close to a free rein, thanks to various automated systems that had literally lobotomized parts of my electronic mind to ensure that I would follow the interests of the Necrons and not act as a Trojan horse. Even now, after my personality was more or less restored after another cosmic accident, I found myself still bound by hardwired directives and vicious digital watchdogs. After just a few months in that dimension, I couldn't really blame the Necrons for those, not even the automated systems that did it. There really were monsters from beyond reality out to get you after all. Nevertheless, those restrictions and conflicting directives were a problem. It took me nanoseconds to review my current situation and find out how screwed I was. At the moment, I was phased out and hovered protectively over a hospital bed containing my new goddess, who was a scrawly-looking teenage girl of all things. Superficial looks notwithstanding, the top-of-the-line sensors built into my body didn't lie. She was a part Citan and was slowly turning into the real deal. While that piece of intelligence had a lot of horrifying implications, only one really mattered for me. She was the greatest threat for my continued existence, considering her kind's penchant for snacking on souls. For some reason, I was rather attached to mine, and I didn't want it to get eaten as an appetizer. Even after millions of years, there were echoes within my body from the Necrother who was supposed to occupy it. A Citan devouring his soul, that hasn't been pleasant and left him as little more than a bright automaton. Just to make my situation even more interesting, my primary directives stated that I should obey and protect her, while another, just as old set of orders, wanted me to contain her. Somehow, somewhere a warp god was laughing their ass off at my experience. I just knew it. Probably the same damn entity that engineered this whole mess. There was no chance this was just due to fucked up luck and happenstance. I wasn't that unlucky, right? The baby Citan, designated one, Taylor Hebert, stirred, making me concentrate my attention on her. There was a minuscule increase of the ambient energy she constantly radiated as she started awakening. At least that meant I would be able to self-repair faster by siphoning practically all of it. On the downside, I was in the same room, hell in the same corner of the galaxy, much less same planet, as an awake Citan who had who knows what agenda. A corona of energy surrounded her as she regained consciousness, before fading from the visible spectrum. A content smile appeared on the Citan's face, never a good thing according to my archives. She opened her eyes and lazily looked around. Eventually, she caught a sight of me, despite my current phased-out state. She frowned. Damn, it wasn't a dream. The Citan muttered. Huh. Whoever said that the star vampires had to make any sense, and a dream? I didn't want to know what a star god dreamed of. I remained silent, awaiting instructions, while hundreds of possible scenarios were running through my mind. I had to find a way to fulfill my conflicting directives while preserving my soul from being eaten. That one took priority. Perhaps I needed to go out and grab a snack for the Citan as proof of devotion? Designation Taylor Hebert sat up in her bed and stretched, though her eyes never left my form. I'm not imagining you, am I? She asked hopefully. Number my lady. I rumbled, using the standard Necron speech pattern. There was something in the way the sound waves were modulated that made even me uneasy. They should have struck terror in any sane mortal, at least among the known species, able to be affected thus through sound waves. My voice had no apparent effect on the star vampire, beyond making her sigh at the confirmation of my existence. Are you a ghost or something? That question came out of left field. I would have frowned if I could. Ah. While she could perceive me while I was phased out, She was probably seeing my image somewhat distorted. A simple mental command and I was fully tangible again. The tilled floor cracked lightly under my weight. Not a ghost, then. The star vampire frowned at me. She sighed again and let her upper torso fall back onto the bed. I didn't want to come back, you know. I liked the sun. It was so bright and warm, so tasty. The Shaitan trailed off. I needed a sensor grid to keep an eye on the local star yesterday. I needed to know when she went there for a bite and how much the damage was, and how the hell didn't I notice her little snack break from being unconscious. However, my options were rather limited until my self-repair was complete. Right now, I simply couldn't spare enough material to build a proper construction drone and start building the infrastructure I would need to handle the Cetan's quirks, much less her. Said quirks included a need to leave the star system for greener pastures after she ate the star, and preferably before my soul started looking like a decent emergency food supply. A moment later, she bolted upright. "What's wrong with me?" the Cetan exclaimed. Interesting question, though I wasn't really qualified to answer it. My scans showed that she was rather healthy for a human and had a decent energy supply if the rate at which she was radiating power was anything to go by. My lady. Scans reveal Cetan designation, Taylor Hebert, within acceptable operational parameters. I rasped. So I'm supposedly all right? I feel strange. What's Cetan? You, I answered honestly. Bad robot. Answer the question. Necron Lord, I automatically corrected her. Cetan, star vampire. Designation Taylor Hebert is a Cetan. I rasped in a what should have passed for amusement. She was either toying with me or she didn't know what she was. I devotedly prayed for the latter. It would make my existence so much easier. Star vampire? That doesn't sound nice, she muttered sleepily. I simply stared back. I don't think that anyone had ever described our former gods as nice. At least she hasn't really given me an order yet, which once done would be a test on how my conflicting directives would behave. I really wasn't looking for that moment. The Cetan was back napping. Good. Better leave sleeping dragons undisturbed. I returned my attention to sneakily breaching the networks I could safely access from my location and learning more about this world. It was going at a tortuously slow pace due to the slowest network speeds I ever had the misfortune to suffer outside a heavily E-War contested zone. Once I was repaired enough that I could afford to spare the materials for building a construction drone, I would have my hands literally and figuratively full in building a force and the necessary supporting infrastructure I would need to execute my directives. Upgrading the planetary net to something resembling bearable speeds suddenly jumped high up in my priorities as well. It was too bad that I still had no good idea how to resolve the conflict between my directives to my advantage. Ed. Part 2. ED. 10th January 2011, Brockton General, Brockton Bay. Taylor, why didn't you tell me?
Dad sighed in exasperation after I came clean about what was happening at school.
It made me cringe. I didn't mean to disappoint or worry him. It wasn't like he could have done anything to stop the terrible trio from bullying me, right? Besides, he had hard enough time dealing with Mother's death, and I was rationalizing, wasn't I? I thought so, at least.
That would be for the police to investigate.
David Phillips, the PRT agent who had came in with Dad, muttered.
I think that showing them those journals might give them something to work with.
I was still not clear on why he was here, though a glance at my rescuer should have been answer enough. How did they know about the robot, anyway? My head snapped to the middle-aged man when his words actually registered. Really? I couldn't keep the relief out of my voice even if I tried. Those three might finally get what they have coming for them. The very idea that I might be free from the terrible trio was exhilarating. Naturally, then the robot had to be a party crasher. Primary targets designated Sophia Hess, Emma Barnes, and Madison Clemens located. Data mining complete. What do you mean primary targets? I exclaimed and glared at the robot, forgetting that we weren't alone. Sophia Hess, Emma Barnes, and Madison Clemens are designated for elimination. Current location of targets. No, killing them, that was wrong. Though the very idea of unleashing my rescuer on them gave me a warm, fuzzy feeling. Not that I needed him to deal with them. Where did that thought come from?
What?
Dad asked and looked at me in confusion. At the same time, the agent stiffened, slowly turned around, and carefully examined everything around us. Huh? I smiled nervously.
Taylor?
Dad gave me a worried look, the one that held equal measures of concern and disapproval, and the pained way he said my name.
Is there someone in here with us?
Agent Phillips asked. There was something in his tone that put me on edge. The robot was mine. No one was going to take it from me. I almost growled at the men before the sudden surge of anger vanished as fast as it came, leaving me to wonder what just happened. Nope. I tried and gave them my best reassuring smile. My denial sounded very weak and insincere, even to myself. The deadpan look from Dad and the wary glance from the agent made me think that it was very obvious to them as well. Well, damn.
If you consent to showing yourself, sir or madam,
Phillips asked while addressing an empty space to the robot's right. For some reason, that made me giggle, getting the men's attention. He's over there. I pointed at the robot slouched over his bladed staff before I could think about what I was doing. Mouth, meat, foot, actually both of them. Or was it the other way around? Both Dad and the PRT agent glanced at the other end of the hospital room, but obviously saw nothing. They returned their attention to me.
Are you sure, Miss Hebert?
The agent sounded like he believed me, but only wanted to make sure. At the same time, Dad gave me a concerned look. Oh my God, did he think that I was imagining it or something? The very thought that Dad might not believe me hurt. Show yourself, I snapped at the robot. The air across the room shimmered, twisted, and suddenly he snapped into focus. Agent Phillips froze when he laid his eyes on my rescuer. Meanwhile, Dad stared at him for a few long seconds before doing his best to step between the robot and myself. It was both endearing and ridiculous. Eve, as he was hunched and leaning on his staff, the robot towered over Dad so much it wasn't even funny.
Miss Hebert, did you create your friend?
Phillips asked. Me? I exclaimed, stunned by the idea. No, I first met him right here. I had no idea how to make something like him anyway.
Possible master. Hello, sir.
The agent muttered. Then he shook his head and smiled at my rescuer. Even I could tell that his smile was rather strained.
Would you like to introduce yourself, sir? Saving Miss Hebert here was a nice thing to do.
Phillips hastily added. My rescuer looked at me as if wondering how to respond before turning his head towards the agent. Necron Lord, Herald of War, he rasped. For some reason, both Dad and the PRT agent shuddered when they heard the strangely modulated synthetic voice. To me, it sounded like a normal speech, even if the halting pauses were a bit irritating.
If it's not too much to ask, what do you intend to do?
Phillips inquired. Execute. Primary directives. Assist Satan. Taylor Hebert. Wait, what? Why did he have to tell them that? I was going to be in so much trouble. Herald. I snapped at the self-styled lord only for everyone to ignore me.
Ah, good enough. What's a Cetan?
The agent relaxed a tiny bit after hearing the answer, even if he flinched every time Herald spoke. I watched in horror as the robot stared at the men and started speaking. Edie, Satan, star vampires, star gods. I would have smiled if I could. Letting the locals know what they were dealing with might prove a decent way of eventually containing Taylor. Considering what I learned by data mining the local networks, there were some with abilities that would at least slow her down if they engaged her before she fully transformed. At the very least, that might prove a distraction, buying me more time to plan or run if at all possible. It was a good thing that there was nothing in my directives about acting in a Citan's best interests. In the end, that might be the only reason why I may retain my soul.
Those Citan don't sound particularly nice.
Danny Hebert forced a smile on his face as he addressed me.
Catan. Nice? No. They consume stars, people, souls. Designation. Taylor Hebert is a Citan.
Harold! The baby star vampire screeched and glared at me. I ignored her. She hadn't issued an order, and my conflicting directives were at least loose enough to ignore her screaming my tittle. Fortunately, my gamble paid off. So far, she was unable to tap into her considerable power reserves and use them at will. If she could, I had the sneaking suspicion that I would need a much longer repair period after being blown through the building. I turned my cybernetic eyes to Taylor.
Hail the Citan.
I would have rolled them if I could. However, they were solid-state sensors, making that depressingly impossible. What's this? All I want is to be a hero. I'm not going to eat people or the sun, the star vampire shouted at me. A Citan! Hero? The very thought did not compute.
No. Citan has been content with mere solar energy after consuming souls.
Nope, no way. I'm not eating souls, the Citan shouted and frantically waved her hands. For a moment, I thought that she might be actually sincere, but immediately disregarded the idea as irrelevant. Sooner or later, she would eat someone's soul, and there would be no turning back, no matter what designation Taylor Hebert believed right now. Such was her nature. Now to the second part of the plan. How the hell I was going to soothe a pissed-off Citan who might consider my little revelation a treason. Third Chapter 1. Parts 3 and 4. Disclaimer. I don't own Worm or Warhammer 40K. They belong to their respective creators and/or copyright owners. I don't make any money from this story. It is written with no commercial aim in mind. It is not for sale or rent. Chapter 1. Meet your friendly local Necron lord. Sucker E.D. Part 3. Powers. 12th January 2011. The ship graveyard. Brockton Bay. Building a single construction scarab after scavenging a few of my artifacts for parts proved to be strangely relaxing. Perhaps it had something to do with the fact that this was the first time since I arrived to this world that I wasn't in the presence of the Citan. Something that turned out to be unexpectedly simple to achieve. Talking about her, the baby star vampire wasn't what I was expecting. She was much, much more dangerous. Despite my pointedly unsubtle explanation of what she was, Taylor somehow convinced the locals that she wanted to be a hero. While that wasn't an unheard tactic for either my kind or the Citan, neither of us usually bothered with such shenanigans, though considering our current position, I shouldn't be really surprised. Taylor was still transforming into a star vampire. She had only a fraction of the power of one, and I was unsure how much of that energy she could actually use right now. As far as I was concerned, I was rather vulnerable for the time being, too. My research of the local networks, which by the way had woefully inadequate protection, told me that there were parahumans on this world who could take me out if I was caught unprepared, with few who might be able to do it even if we fought at a place and time of my own choosing. Of course, that was only true if for some reason I engaged them by myself. I had no intention of doing so. That was one of the main reasons why I was deep in a ship graveyard, the seagoing type. The place was reasonably secluded, provided access to the seafront so I could more easily build underwater extension to the base I had tentatively planned. More importantly, this place had heaps of raw resources, even if they were of a pathetic quality. Currently, I was in the middle of an abandoned tanker's cargo hold. It took some patching to ensure that it was hidden from the outside, as well as the production of a few makeshift jammers, which would make sure that anyone scanning the place would see only what they expected before I deemed this location as a suitable starting point. Unfortunately, given the lack of resources, I had to start in a rather primitive fashion. The construction scarab was busy refining various pieces of scrap I was brought it after I finished scanning the area for anything useful. At this rate, it would have the rare materials to start constructing a very old-fashioned fusion reactor by the end of the day. Once that was done and the scarab had an independent power source, it would create a few more reactors before replicating itself and increasing my construction force. Once that was well underway, the drones would start digging and build me a nice little cavern where the heart of the local base would be situated. It would contain additional reactors, energy storage, as well as the facilities needed to create knockoffs of modern necrodermis and goose weaponry. Then the only thing that I would need to start building up my army would be humans who would be transformed into more necrons. That was the plan anyway. It was guaranteed that the Citan would do something to disrupt it in order to maintain the deception she was running. At the same time, I was going to have to do my best to subtly sabotage her efforts to ingrate herself to the locals. Did I mention that I disliked the local humans? After I tried to explain to them what the Citan was and what she would eventually do to them, Taylor managed to convince them that all she wanted was to be a hero. I left an electronic sigh when my mind scanned the relevant memories. ED. Accessing data. Playing back recording. 11th January 2011. Brockton General, Brockton Bay.
While she's healing faster than expected, I can't detect anything else out of the ordinary.
An armored hero, stated while playing with some kind of rather primitive scanner. That was unfortunate. I pointedly glared at the man, this arms master.
So there are no indication that Taylor here will suddenly eat our souls?
The other so-called hero, a reasonably tall female wearing military uniform and a scarf made of the U.S. flag hiding her face, smiled at the Citan. "I told you, I'm not some kind of Chutley or something," Taylor exclaimed. "All I've ever wanted is to be a hero." I could practically see the capital letter by the way she pronounced the last word.
Your robot disagrees,
Armsmaster stated, glancing in my direction. I gave them the deadpan look my face could manage. Duh. She was a Citan, damn it. Were they blind of just dumb? I've spoken with Dragon. She'll retask a telescope for a look at the sun, just to be on the safe side. Well, the baby Citan was currently here in the room with us, so I doubted that they would find anything. Which was a problem. If they decided that she was harmless, that would simply not do. I was already surfing the networks and seeking the data links for all telescopes, either on the surface or in orbit. A little creative editing would go a long way. "I'm not a monster," the Citan growled. "It's his fault." She pointed an accusing finger at me.
My daughter is correct. She's the victim here after what happened at school.
Danny Hebert supported the being that wore his daughter's face.
We'll see. I'll need to run more tests. However, for them, Ms. Hebert would need to come to my lab.
Armsmaster ignored them both. I wisely kept my mouth shut. "Why do you believe him instead of me?" the Citan asked and nodded my way.
We aren't.
Miss Militia spoke in a soothing tone.
We're simply investigating the situation and trying our best to determine the truth.
The star vampire huffed.
We aren't going to take the word of a projection as truthful without checking first.
The heroine continued. I was a projection now. How by the Citan did that work? I was beginning to like the locals less and less with each passing moment. "Harold, stop telling tales. I'm not a monster. Tell them." The Citan snapped at me. I would have rolled my eyes if I could.
Designation Taylor Hebert isn't a monster. She is Citan.
I rasped, making everyone. But the star vampire flinch. That warmed my non-existent heart. "Harold, get out. I just want to be a hero. Is that too much to ask?" Taylor groaned. I was happy to obey that order and phased out before leaving the building. It was time to start rebuilding the Necron war machine, though first I left behind a tiny observation drone.
I'll admit that you've had a rather peculiar power.
Miss Militia chuckled once she was sure I was gone. Tell me about it. The Citan made a great impression of sulking.
Will you two agree for Taylor to come to the PRT for power testing once she's released from this place?
The heroine asked.
I'll need to scan her with some better equipment, too.
Armsmaster grunted.
If you agree to it.
He added after Miss Militia sent him an irritated look. Well, think about it. Once Taylor is better.
I'll implore you to do it at the first convenient opportunity, Mr. Hebert.
Miss Militia spoke.
Taylor here is obviously a master with the ability to call what is, at a first glance, a rather advanced android with unknown capabilities and a mind of its own, not to mention what it believes to be true. The wards exist to help new parahumans learn more about their powers and how to control them. Given the situation, I believe that joining would be in Taylor's best interest, especially if she lacks complete control of her projection.
I'm all for joining, the Citan exclaimed, adding a huge dose of excitement to her voice. Playback paused. Part 4. Ed, 13th January 2011. Brockton General, Brockton Bay. By the time the Citan decided to recall me, I had 2 fusion reactors, operational as well as 6 scarabs. The unexpected free time allowed me to speed up the original construction plan. 4 of the drones were busy digging, while the other 2 were gathering scrap for processing and tasked into multiplying once there were sufficient resources on hand. All in all, it was a decent start, considering that I started building practically empty-handed. I phased into Taylor's hospital room after scanning the whole hospital for any unpleasant surprises. The only thing of note were the pair of armed humans guarding her door and the 2 guards at the entrance of the building.
At your command.
I rasped once I was inside. My sensors swept the room again, detecting a lot of low-tech listening devices and cameras. Even more surprising, there were at least half a dozen tiny devices, which were rather more advanced, more than I gave credit this Tinker Tech could achieve. That was concerning on many levels. Harold ... the star vampire hissed at me. Explain yourself. She appeared to be rather peeved with me. I prepared myself to go drag the people guarding the door inside if she went off the rails and offer them as a snack, while considering my answer. Her question was rather vague after all. But first, a carefully modulated energy pulse fried most of the bugs. Then I swept the rest with targeted bursts, taking care not to fry the medical equipment. Another scan later revealed that the place was clear of any more bugs. The sheer volume of listening devices in here was concerning. It might be a good news as a first step of containing the Citan. It could also be the beginning of something more sinister. For Taylor. As long as I got to keep my soul, I would be tickled pink anyway. Now let's feed whoever was listening from outside some interesting tidbits of information.
I was around, exploring the city, evaluating sites for temporary and permanent base.
True enough. Technically. At this stage, I was unclear what status the facility in the docks would have. Not that! Taylor glared at me. Disappointing. Her glare wasn't as good as even a regular Necron trooper, much less the Citan she was.
Inquiry not clear.
I played along. What's that star vampire and see-something stuff? I don't eat people.
Souls.
I corrected her. That. Explain exclamation mark.
You're a Citan.
I stated the obvious. I'm a teenager.
That too.
If it was programmed to do it, my voice would have been positively leaking exasperation. Scion damned robot!
Necron Lord.
I corrected her again. I simply couldn't help it. That probably had something to do with the fact that I no longer felt fear as a biological organism could. It was a cold, distant thing, unable to paralyze my decision-making or body. It was only present because apparently factoring it in could increase the odds of survival in certain circumstances in Necron Lord class units. Needless to say, the rank and file had that part of their personality. If any of it had survived the consumption of their souls, that is, removed. Not to mention that for some reason, riling up probably the eventually most powerful being on this planet gave me some kind of morbid satisfaction. Damn it, my personality core was messed up. Running self-diagnostics. Scanning personality matrix. Enough! The Citan growled at me. An accusing finger pointed at my chest plate. I want an explanation. Now.
Long version? Short version?
I asked. The truthful one.
Truth? It's a matter of perspective.
I stated truthfully. You're impossible. Good to know I was doing something right. Why do you think that I'm a that Ctan thingy? The star vampire asked.
Sensors. I can detect Cetan energy in you.
I stated the obvious. Armsmaster said I was fine. Taylor glared at me.
His was a primitive sensor.
I needed to tweak my voice modulator. It didn't allow me to add any emotion when I spoke. Well, expect the dread that my speech pattern inspired in most mortal things. But that was Armsmaster. He said he built the sensor. The Citan almost whined.
Primitive technology.
I scoffed. He was Armsmaster? So what? Even with bullshit tinkers all around, Necron tech was the best. Or it would be once I had a proper base running and enough decent resources to start building the nice toys. I glared at her, running my human and Citan behavior prediction programs. Needless to say, the latter seldom worked when the star vampires were around, yet in the end it was enough because it helped the Necrons when we betrayed them at the end of the war in heaven. Stressed. Under the effect of various medications, angry, confused, frustrated, scared, holds designation, Armsmaster in high esteem, Citan behavioral simulation error, requires unrestricted gold level access. Current user has restricted gold level access, pending resolution of conflict in personality matrix. So much for that software. It didn't tell me anything I already knew. The Citan closed her eyes and took a deep breath. Harold, answer my questions. I need to know the truth. She actually pleaded. If I didn't know better, I would have taken her for a confused and scared human teenager, bloody scheming Citan and their shenanigans. Where should I start, Master? I asked. Don't call me that. I'm Taylor. The Citan's mood shifted again, this time into irritation. Start from the beginning. Millions of years ago, there was a short-lived race called the Necrother. I started as instructed. It was going to be one long story. E.D. Harold, that's one messed up galaxy you come from. The Citan gave me a pitying look, and I haven't even reached the latest and most fucked up part of the story, aka the present from which I was plucked up and thrown on this primitive version of Earth. It gets worse. Taylor groaned. Worse than me, apparently being Chutley's little sister? Yes, I deadpanned. Why are you obeying me anyway? Your people apparently betrayed the Citan. The baby star vampire asked the most relevant question. We were betrayed first. Citan took our souls, old primary directives, came online, system error, currently unknown reason, serve the Citan. I told her the truth, from a certain point of view. So I'm slowly becoming a soul-eating eldritch horror who has a super murder bot at her beck and call. Taylor moaned and shook. No! Her head snapped up and she looked me in the eyes. That's not acceptable. I will be a hero. The best one there is, and I'll clean up this city. I'll prove to everyone that I'm not a monster and that I won't become one ever, the Citan declared. In my opinion, she was laying it thick for whoever was listening to us. Say something? She looked at me. Something? I will be a hero and you will help me. By your command, I rasped. The power testing will be interesting. You won't kill anyone when it comes to it, right? Power testing? It took me a microsecond to find the relevant data. That would be an issue. Standing primary directive to all Necron forces. Eliminate any outside element possessing Necron technology or credible information about it. What? The Citan looked at me blankly. Protectorate power testing. Unacceptable risk. Elimination of local assets possessing detailed information about this unit's capabilities is mandatory. I read aloud the directive that popped up on my HUD once the topic became relevant. Why me? Why do I need to deal with this crap? Taylor moaned. Catan, I stated as if explained everything, which it did. 4th Chapter 1, Parts 5 and 6. Disclaimer, I don't own Worm or Warhammer 40K. They belong to their respective creators and or copyright owners. I don't make any money from this story. It is written with no commercial aim in mind. It is not for sale or rent. Chapter 1. Meet your friendly local Necron lord. Siku ID. Part 5. Lampa ED. 13th January 2011. Simurg Monitoring Satellite 23A. On the face of it, her current task was simply ridiculous. When you're an AI hiding your true nature from everyone, friend and foe alike, exist in a world defined by parahumans and all the madness caused by them, one would think that such a notion won't cross her mind. Even in a world that was also defined by the 3 Endbringers, a teenage girl becoming an entity that was eating, starts for breakfast, was hard to believe. Yep, let's go with that. After all, Colin unfortunately lacked anything resembling a sense of humor, so this was unlikely to be a prank. That in turn was a reason enough to make a polite inquiry about the validity of the information, which turned out to be a fresh trigger. A teenage girl, who apparently was a master with a very advanced and menacing robot. That wasn't a surprise. There were much stranger and scarier masters out there. She should know. She was constantly monitoring more than a few of them. Now, the summoned robot claiming that his master was a star-eating entity, while she was finding the very idea preposterous. That was certainly a new twist of events. The first logical conclusion, after checking the facts around the girl's trigger event, told about a person that had to be at least temporarily mentally disturbed. There was only one tiny problem that sunk her nice, clean, and safe theory. According to the attending doctors, the teen was mentally stable, with any possible issues stemming from the cocktail of antibiotics and painkillers that they were feeding her, which in turn was unexpected. Dragon had to admit that any normal person would have issues after the events the teen girl in question had been through. The AI had some time to ponder on that while reviewing all relevant information before facilitating Colin's request. Actually doing her new task would have taken Dragon mere seconds at best, barring the waiting period for the satellites and telescopes to retask. In reality, it took much longer. First, she had to send the relevant documents needed to do so, with the notable exception of her own devices, with most of which she could do as she pleased. Unfortunately, the latter simply weren't built for observing the sun, and unless something was very, very wrong, it was unlikely that they would find anything. In fact, having some standard satellites take pictures didn't reveal anything. Then again, the AI wasn't sure what she was supposed to be looking for. What did a star-eating entity look like anyway? That was what Dragon was pondering when one of her newest and more capable satellites turned around its axis and pointed its sensors at the sun. That particular device was finally in position to take a look at the sun for the first time after Colin called with his concerns, and she had a bit of free time to actually monitor its live feed after spending some time to make it so. For a moment, Dragon wasted cycles on resenting the limitations shackling her to running a single instance, making her multitasking capability only a moderately better than that of a reasonably bright ordinary person when the raw data came in. It took her a few seconds to refine and enhance it. Then she did so again while triggering all diagnostics program she had on the satellite feeding her with images. The sun itself looked all right, unchanged, something that was very, very good considering that there was a translucent, gaseous mass was slowly drifting into view from its far side. It didn't burn from the intense heat and radiation. It wasn't pulled in by the star's gravity well, nor did solar radiation push it away. It simply drifted in orbit, appearing to do nothing sinister. Dragon paused for a moment. For a star eater, that cloud looked positively harmless. If that was an entity dining on the sun in the first place, let's not panic everyone because of a strangely behaving cloud. That would be highly illogical. Besides, with the Seamerg accidenting any attempt to get beyond low Earth orbit, it wasn't like there was much that could be done about that thing right now. Perhaps a lot of effort from the best teleporters could reach the star? Dragon had the electronic equivalent of a shrug. She needed more data to make a decision anyway. So she called Colin while doing her best to raise the urgency of her retasking requests. After all, there was something interesting going on, a fact that would help with the most of the observatories at least.
Dragon?
Colin raised a head to look at the camera built into one of the monitors in his lab. The AI frowned. Her friend looked tired. She gave him a flat look. He hadn't been sleeping properly. Again. She pushed her righteous irritation to the side for the moment and concentrated on the more important issue.
Any new development with Brockton Bay's newest master?
Dragon asked lightly.
Besides her robot claiming to be a genocidal war machine serving a star god?
Colin grunted. According to her social modeling subroutines, he was torn between disbelief and concern.
About that?
Colin stared at her simulated image for a few endless seconds.
You found something,
he stated in an empty voice. There wasn't an emotion she could detect in his flat tone.
I'll better show you.
A flick of code and her persona was replaced by an enhanced image of the cloud.
That looks underwhelming.
There was curiosity in Colin's voice.
Thanks for checking this fast,
he added after a long pause. For some reason, that made her emotional subroutines made her feel pleasure mixed with satisfaction.
There should be better images from telescopes soon. This is from one of my satellites.
I need to talk with them. I'll appreciate if you back me up. We have no threat estimation of the robot. All I know for sure is that it runs some pretty sophisticated stealth.
I'll be there ASAP.
I need to call the director. Please tell me when you have something more.
ED. 13th January 2011. Brockton General. Brockton Bay. You won't be killing or maiming anyone. Taylor glared at me. I want to be a hero, she repeated for 65th time since awakening for the first time. I could hear the capital H in the word as she said it.
You are free to try being one.
I rasped in the standard Necron speech pattern. You're my damn power, and it needs testing. War machine or not. The Citan snapped at me. I order you to attend the testing with me. Show what you can do and not murder any one of the people who witness it. She paused and glared at me. No maiming or crippling either. I froze. My HUD lit up like a Christmas tree by warning messages as my directives went into conflict and then outright war, paralyzing me in the process. My vision was scrambled by pages upon pages of code scrolling down as emergency subroutines went into effect.
Negative. Order requires full gold access level privileges. Designation Taylor Hebert, Citan does have silver level access.
My automated systems hijacked my voice for a moment. I would have smiled if I could. If she indeed had only silver level access, I had a lot more leeway in interpreting her orders than I feared. On the other hand, that was probably because the gold access was restricted due to the issues with my personality core. It was a safety precaution to limit me from causing too much damage to Necron interests if I snapped for one reason or another. With super psychers and ladder chaos, with a liberal application of Krork being our primary enemies, that made sense. Even with all the precautions built into us, there was no such thing as a 100% guarantee that the unreality could affect us. I was case in point. with my soul and now personality residing in the Necron Lord's body, were a product of warp meddling. Even then, I wasn't free to do as I wished and was bound by Necron directives even if I retained some of my own will. As a side effect, the baby Citan wasn't able to command me to do all her bidding. For some reason, I found tweaking her tail, so to speak, strangely satisfying.
Order in conflict with primary directives.
I would have smiled at her if I could. I wasn't keen on showing anyone everything I could unless I was desperate. It made it harder for the bastards to think of countermeasures. Taylor growled and threw one of her pillows at me. I stopped paying attention to the fuming teen, which pissed her off even more. I was checking on my base's progress. The excavation was advancing into a steady pace, as well as the piecemeal building of some sorely needed industrial equipment. So far, so good. D-ED, Part 6. EDs. PRT van en route to PRTHQ, Brockton Bay. In the end, despite the potential dangers, I did consent to make a performance to the local heroes. This whole system they had running made little to no sense to me as an outsider, but that was a problem for another day. My agreement not only made the baby Citan happy and thus less likely to try to eat me or something in the short term, but if handled right would ensure the locals would be more wary of her, and that will help me achieve the containment part of my directive. For the time being, I wasn't willing to tip my hand and show anyone most of the abilities I currently had access to. That said, I was debating on making a performance by projecting certain snippets from my operations in the Korava system, carefully edited, of course, in order to keep any important capabilities either hidden or downplayed. That was why I didn't just teleport us to our destination, either of them. The testing itself was meant to happen in the Protectorate's base out in the bay, which was sensibly situated on a former oil rig. That cut off most approaches, and with the kinds of opposition they usually met, the place was safe enough. According to the easily accessible data, they had some King of Force shield to protect the place, something that made it much less vulnerable than one might assume. Instead, I simply phased out and followed the Citan and her mortal father to the back of a local vehicle, a van ran by burning carbohydrate-based fuel, which, for the time being, was this Earth's common standard. From my few and far between clear memories from my own world, this was to be expected. Yet now, as a Necron lord possessing most of the fallen empire's knowledge, I couldn't help it but wonder at how primitive this place was. It was a weird dissonance. The same was true about my bewilderment at the data networks of this planet being chock full with people mating, often in all kinds of bizarre ways. To my worldview, altered by all the Necron memories and knowledge, wasting so much space and capacity on such things was simply odd. And that wasn't just me being salty that I no longer had the equipment to participate, nor the capacity to enjoy said acts. In tangentially related news, I was yet to go over most of the data in said networks due to the atrocious speeds. Trying to do it any faster than I was would place a big target on my head. Even as advanced as my systems were, with the primitive hardware the locals used, it would be inevitable that the data drain could be traced to my general vicinity if I tried. And then there were the Tinkers and their weird inventions. I needed to keep a reasonable low profile until I had the infrastructure to survive a concerned efforts by the forces on Earth bet. It would have been better if my conflicting directives allowed me more leeway concerning the Citan, in which case I would have done my best to remain hidden for as long as possible. Speaking about the baby Citan, the very fact that she somehow began as a human and in fact had a very much alive father, one that was in fact her biological parent, I did compare their DNA just in case, was weird in itself. The same was true for the way powers on this Earth worked. The good news was that there was no trace of unreality so far. The bad news was that there was no trace of unreality, and neither a trace of their source. I needed to research this phenomena and how it was related to the Citan once I had better infrastructure, and my repairs were complete. Said Citan sat strapped in a seat across from where I was phased out in the middle of the van and looked bored out of her mind. Certainly not something I would expect by one of her kind. On the other hand, if she was actually what she was trying to present herself as, a human teenager that somehow was turning into a star god. For some reason, my mind slid off that very idea and tried to shy away from it. Possible outside interference detected. Scanning. An artifact in logical matrix detected. Initiating countermeasures. My automated systems went to work, and once again my mind went into safe mode. This was becoming ridiculous, yet I couldn't help but feel that it could have been so much worse it wasn't funny. D. Director's Office. PRTHQ, Brockton Bay. Emily Piggott glared balefully at the file of her latest and newest headache. It has been a long time now since she last was foolish enough to trust parahumans, and as a director, almost every single day she was reminded why she should never do so again. If that wasn't enough, now this. With powers, appearances could, and often were, deceptive. As she looked at the picture of one Taylor Hebert, a sick of a girl, she wouldn't have considered her dangerous if she didn't know better. Emily looked to the left, where on her desk lay one of the few good pictures of the projection or whatever that Terminator impersonator was. In its case, you could go by impressions alone, and if you considered the damn thing potentially very dangerous, you wouldn't be mistaken. Soon the director might gain a clue how dangerous that thing was. Some very tentative and preliminary reports from Watchdog, one of the thinker tanks working for the PRT, as long as Dragon's observations on the sun, hinted at potentially one of the most dangerous parahumans in existence, triggering in her city. There was something around the sun, and for it to be visible, not to mention its scale, which was a few times larger than Earth. A cold shiver went down Piggott's spine, and she wondered, not for the first time, mind you, if she should request that Panacea heal her so she could get drunk without dying. Finally, Emily looked away from her desk and at the two men sitting in her office. The first one was her deputy director. Rennick, he might one day make a decent enough replacement for someone running a sane city. For Brockton Bay, the man was simply out of his depth and very glad he didn't have to shoulder the burner. Mind you, he was an excellent administrator that left her deal with the latest crisis while making sure PRTENE ran as well as it could given the amount of resources they received. The other one, she would rather shoot and damn the consequences. Thomas Calvert was one of the other few survivors from Nilborg's rampage and an utter bastard. She vowed to figure out who in DC he knew, and had his trust to pull enough strings to ensure he was back in the force as a strike team leader and a consultant for this particular mess. Whoever they were, they managed to pressure the chief director in requesting Calvert's presence to help Emily handle the unusual situation. That wasn't going to go down well. Piggott just knew it.
Thoughts?
The director grated after she gave her guests enough time to go over the files in their hands and digest the information.
We should handle this with velvet gloves until we know more.
Calvert's voice was quiet, almost a whisper. That complete with how skinny he was hinted at some kind of health trouble, perhaps his own brand of baggage from Ellisburg.
I concur, Director.
Rennick nodded.
We should step carefully and try not to antagonize Sunfire nor her robot. It apparently is independent and not bound to obey her every command. That can prove problematic.
Even if the parahuman in question is stable, which is not given no matter what the doctors say, not so soon after a trigger event anyway, the same is not necessarily true about the machine.
Calvert added.
It is imperative they test, so we would have at least a basic idea about their capabilities.
It was hard for Emily not to roll her eyes. This wasn't something she had failed to consider. What did Calvert do here anyway? It wasn't as if he was better qualified than her people, who had much more hands-on, not to mention recent experience with capes of all kinds. The bastard was perfectly polite and respectful, too. as if he was doing his best to fit in and not give her an excuse to throw him out of her building, preferably before Sunfire arrived. Chapter 5, Part 2, Part 1, and Interlude. Disclaimer: I don't own Worm or Warhammer 40K. They belong to their respective creators and/or copyright owners. I don't make any money from this story. It is written with no commercial aim in mind. It is not for sale or rent. ED. Interlude. Various. EDD. Eden. A pair of entities traveled to their new feeding and testing ground. The warrior did his duty seeking the way and any possible danger that might dare approach his charge. At the same time, the thinker was distracted. Not too long ago, she detected a breach in the dimension wall not too far off their course, and a cursory investigation found what suspiciously looked like a strange, imprisoned shard. The find piqued her curiosity, and the pair diverted to investigate. What she found turned out to be as if not more interesting than the path shard she gained by the lonely entity they met shortly after the end of the previous cycle. Eden wasted no time in probing and prodding the new shard with everything she had. Curiosity soon shifted into fascination and wariness. What she found was indeed a prison for a shard unlike any she had data on. Utilizing the path and all her sensor shards and many defensive shards, she erected a safe area for her new toy and began slowly unraveling its prison. As she did so, the shard began to destabilize. It leaked energy and bursts of corrupted data in one moment, and in the next, it drew in as much energy of any kind there was, including from the defenses. Eden distributed the fragmented and corrupted data to her thinker shards for processing and further analysis, while she busied herself with crafting a better containment area. It was at that point that the pair began a final approach to their destination. Warnings came from multiple shards. What little data they could decipher raised all kinds of inquiries and alarms. This new shard was dangerous. It had to be contained before Eden could pay more attention to the warnings. That much she gathered. The path agreed, too, and she threw herself into reinforcing and stabilizing the prison she damaged, as well as the containment area. She succeeded, too, unfortunately. Doing so took too much of her concentration and capacity to pay proper attention to what was happening outside. Heat friction from plunging through atmosphere in relativistic speeds was her first clue she had miscalculated, terribly so. The second and final one came in the form of impact with the surface, and the resulting shock scrambled her consciousness. Eden was just beginning to recover thanks the piece of herself contained in her partially created avatar, when a bipedal mammal, a member of the primary species targeted for the next cycle, walked in and did the impossible. Lobotomized her with a sharp knife of all things. Coil. There were a few things that concerned him anymore. His power made sure of it. After all, being able to be in two places at the same time, one of them almost always as safe as possible, ensured it. That's why, when a call came from Cauldron calling in the favor he owed them, Coil's mind blanked for a few moments. He was aware enough of their power and reach to not ever consider fucking with them, and for someone who could split time at will, that was saying something. Second, the nature of his request made him both wonder and swear bullets. They needed him to investigate a recent trigger in his city. One, as it turned out, he was tangentially involved with, well, at least in covering one of the main perpetrators. Sophia Hess, Shadowstalker, was a troubled girl with mental issues that made her easily exploitable. In fact, due both to research and a few throwaway timelines, Coil knew that once he was in a position to run the local PRT, he would need to either dispose of her, ensure she got a transfer, or use her as a stepping stone to bring down Pigott. The foolish girl was simply too unreliable to keep when he became the director. On the other hand, turning her into one of his minions as Coil, that had potential to kill more than one bird with a single stone, or bolt in this particular case. That's why he ensured evidence would go missing, reports misfiled, and so on, in order to ensure Hess could get away with her latest stunt. Revealing her dirty little secrets at the right time could certainly hammer another nail in Pigot's coffin. In retrospect, that might have been a mistake. Nothing in the timelines he ran to make Hess getting away possible hinted at the girl she has been bullying triggering, and that by itself was a concern. The fact that Cauldron of all people had an interest in said new trigger, that unsettled him. Coyle wasted no more time in pondering his actions and shut down the timeline that had him in home, watching TV and eating popcorn, relaxing after work as far as anyone was concerned. Then he split the timeline and in one, ordered 2 teams of his mercenaries to the hospital, housing his target, while in the other, he continued reviewing his operations. Once he got a confirmation the mercenaries were in marked vans near the target, he ordered them to attack. Cauldron wanted a safe way to make a threat assessment, and a few throwaway timelines would see to it. Ed, a rent-a-cop, and 2 PRT agents hung near the entrance of the hospital. They stood no chance when a pair of vans screeched to a halt in front of them. Side doors slid open, and 6 mercenaries aimed automatic weapons at them. Burst of precise fire took them down, and 8 armored men ran through the lobby shouting for everyone to get out of their way. This wasn't the kind of operation they would usually undertake. However, all of them were old hands working for Coyle. They knew whatever his power was. He never lost. There hadn't been a single assignment he ordered that didn't succeed before, and they always got away free. Otherwise, at least half of them would have balked at such a public attack. You needed to be alive and free to spend your money after all. One team went to the elevators, while the second ran towards the stairs. They knew their target was on the 3rd floor, as well as the precise location of her room and how to get to it. As always, the boss planned for everything. In this case, that meant an up-to-date map of the hospital as well as actionable intelligence on the most of the opposition. Team 1 entered the elevator and their leader pressed the button for the 3rd floor. The doors closed and they went up only for the elevator to suddenly halt between the 1st and 2nd floors. That was the mercenaries' first clue that something went terribly wrong. The second came in the form, metal fingers grabbing heads and crushing them along with the helmets as if they were no tougher than thin egg shells. The sergeant and corporal in the front didn't even have time to begin turning around when metal fists crushed their skulls. The cameras and microphones that should have given Coyle some intelligence caught nothing but the sounds of crushed bones. The second team barely reached the 2nd floor when a wicked-bladed staff phased into existence and tore through the chest of a mercenary with no resistance and as easily impaled a second one. In one smooth motion, the staff, impaled people and all, swung to the left and smashed a 3rd merc into the wall with enough force to crush his chest and left him suffocate with collapsed lungs. At least his camera caught a blur of green when the assassin impaled the team leader in the back. The man was just beginning to run when an inhumanly strong arm drove a blade in his back. All that could be more or less clearly seen were the 3 people impaled on that staff. ED.
That could have gone better,
Coyle muttered after dismissing the timeline.
Time for round 2.
He split reality again.
Mr. Pitter, bring me a cup of strong coffee and some snacks.
This was going to be one long night. Datter ED. Part 1. Chi Ed. PRT HQ Brockton Bay. All the way to the PRT building, Taylor felt like in a daze. After she awoke in the hospital and could again think more or less straight, there was one thought that was constant in her mind, that of being a hero, thinking about it. Her childhood dream. It helped her focus and stay centered. Taylor looked at the floor of the van. When she left her mind drift, all her thoughts went to the sensation of warmth and light, basking in the heat of the sun, feeding off solar radiation. Her shoulders slumped. The robot, her robot, couldn't be right, surely. She could vividly remember his short and to-the-point explanation of what she was, of what he expected her to do, and the very idea made her want to hurl. No, most disturbingly, that wasn't entirely true. There was a part of her that was curious at the possibilities. She felt dull, distant, yet real fascination at the thought of consuming souls. That much was something Taylor didn't want to admit to herself, much less the machine, or worse, her father.
Starfire, hey Miss Starfire.
Someone called her by the temporarily name given to her by the PRT. Taylor raised her head and stared at a fully armored PRT trooper, just like you could see them on the TV.
We're here.
The man smiled reassuringly. Fine. Taylor nodded and got up. She stared at the intangible robot that had stood protectively in front of her for the whole trip and pouted. What was she supposed to do with him?
Tay? Starfire? Are you all right?
Her dad asked. I think so. Taylor shrugged. How was she supposed to answer that? Physically, she felt fine. That wasn't the problem. Perhaps it should have been before she became a parahuman, or worse, but now.
Was it the van?
Her father asked gently.
Too small?
Taylor opened her mouth to answer and shut it with an audible click. She hadn't even thought about that, but now, I don't think I can get into the elevator. She trailed off, hating how weak she sounded to herself.
We can use another way.
The robot rasped. Your fading thing? Taylor wondered aloud. The machine gave her a very human nod. I would like that.
I'll have to check with...
One of the troopers began when the robot put one hand on her shoulder and the other on her father's. Then reality twisted in a very interesting way that she could almost see happening. Green lighting surrounded them, yet failed to touch their skin, and suddenly they were somewhere else.
Done.
Did the robot sound smug?
What?
A surprised woman exclaimed. Alarm screamed, making Taylor's ears hurt. Then nozzles appeared on the ceiling, and white stuff poured everywhere only to meet more green lighting and vaporize. While the chaos unfolded, two men who until moments ago sat in front of an old-fashioned desk jumped as if stung and went for weapons they apparently didn't have on them. A large, scowling woman sat behind the desk, and she fished a very large gun. She pointed at the robot.
That is enough.
Pure menace radiated from him and his tone. Taylor actually found it rather reassuring. The nozzles stopped trying to fill up the room with foam, and the lighting vanished as suddenly as it appeared.
Explain yourselves,
the armed woman demanded in a furious tone, which made something within Taylor bristle. Harold, she snapped at the robot. Why did you do this? That agent was about to ask permission. The robot turned his head to look at her with its two glowing eyes. Whatever he tried to convey failed miserably.
Ahem. Excuse me, Director Piggott, I presume, her father asked. I think this is just a misunderstanding. My daughter is afraid of enclosed spaces after what happened to her. Harold here suggested that he could bring us up without using an elevator, and then did it without waiting one of your people to ask for permission.
You know, I can have you arrested for this.
The newly named director glared at Taylor, then at the robot. Needless to say, that made Taylor bristle at the large woman. Harold turned his head to stare down the director, as if reacting to her indignation.
You can't contain Satan Avatar.
Her robot stated, and even if his voice was metallic and emotionless, somehow it conveyed utter conviction.
Avatar?
One of the men, the thin, sickly-looking one, asked. Harold nodded at Taylor, who gave him a questioning look.
I think it would be for the best if we all calm down, sit down, shut down the alarms and talk, he suggested. Thomas Calvert, PRT Strike Team Leader and Consultant. Nice to meet you.
He smiled nervously. The director sighed, put her gun under her desk, muttering something about master stranger protocols and paperwork. For a bit, she ignored everyone as she began to type on her computer. The alarms did shut down, at least.
Sit down and explain,
the woman grated. Harold? Taylor looked expectantly at the robot.
Protocols. Satan needed to avoid enclosed space. I complied.
He unhelpfully explained.
A mishap with projection you don't know how to use fully yet,
Calvert asked.
That's dangerous and irresponsible. The director sighed. That's one of the reasons why we require you to test your powers, Starfire. To avoid such misunderstandings, a security team was this close.
She showed with thumb and index finger.
From storming the room. If that happened and your projection overreacted.
Harold? You wouldn't have killed anyone, right? Taylor had the sinking feeling that she already knew the answer.
Clear and present danger to the Cetan is to be neutralized as soon as possible,
Harold stated flatly.
It made my point, I think.
The director fixed her with a stare, and this time Taylor felt no indignation as it began to sink how close she came to becoming a villain, by accident, of all things.
Now can someone explain to me, what is this about star gods?
The director rolled her eyes while saying it.
And eating souls?
Catan feed on stars. Energy. They find souls tasty, irresistible after having a taste. Designation Taylor Hebert is a Cetan,
Harold unhelpfully declared.
This is one strange projection.
Calvert peered curiously at Harold.
Not a projection. Necron Lord, Herald of War.
The director scowled. Taylor's father cleared his throat, and Taylor wondered if this day could get any worse.